Okay, so welcome everybody to our first virtual Big Rock or our first virtual Run Talk. I'm so used to saying Big Rock because we've previously been doing it at Big Rock Brewery, but I just wanted to say welcome to everybody. We're going to get started in about a minute or two. We still have a lot of people logging on. I'm just watching the number of participants creep up like kind of by the second here. Before we get too far into it, I just want to say to everybody, this is our first virtual Run Talks. We're kind of learning as we go, so we appreciate everybody's patience with us. Yeah, so we are recording this on YouTube in case anybody has connection issues or there's something that you want to rewatch. That you are going to be able to do that. So while we wait for other people to join us, or first of all, let everybody know all of your mics are on mute. So anybody who comes in, they're kind of like, why can't I say anything? It's because there's going to be a lot of people in here and we just don't want to be talking over to each other. So myself, Kirsten, Melissa, and Trevor, all of our mics are live. You'll always be able to hear us. And if you do have a question, please place it in the chat. So while a few more people filter in, what I'll do is kind of just go around and let everybody introduce themselves. We've got a great talk for you guys tonight. With Kirsten Fleming, the Executive Director of Run Calgary and the Scotiabank Calgary Marathon, Melissa Pauuwe of We Run the World Coaching, and a surprise guest, Trevor Hofbauer, two-time Canadian Marathon champion and the 2018 Canadian Half Marathon champion and Tokyo Olympian to be ... So I'll let you guys just introduce yourselves and say how you're doing. Melissa, let's start with you.
Hey, thanks for having me, Raf. Yeah, as you mentioned, Melissa Pauuwe with We Run the World Coaching, a local running group here in Calgary, about 50 of us. I'm just grateful to be here, to be able to chat running in these times with all these awesome people. Thanks for having me.
Kirsten.
Hello to everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Raf, and pulling this together so quick. I've been part of the last 3 IRL in real life at Big Rock, so cheers to Big Rock for hosting, and just because we couldn't be there, I'm still repping Big Rock. So appreciate that we're going to keep the conversation going online through these trying times. I think the intention is to have one every week as long as there are people who show up. So we have lots of guests kind of in the wings, and if you guys want to hear from someone, by all means, let us know and we'll tee them up. But I'm really excited to be here. And there's a lot of uncertainty in the racing world, but what we know for sure is that we can keep running. So lots to discuss tonight about how we can do that while also respecting some of the new rules that we're having to get used to overnight and supporting one another. So thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here, Kirsten. Trevor, our surprise guest.
Hey,
what's going on with you?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm Trevor Hofbauer. I'm the one that's going to be running the Mystery Marathon at the Mystery event sometime in the future. And I'm here to talk about the current situation at hand, what we're dealing with, and I'm just happy to be here, I guess.
Yeah. I know there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be really eager to hear from you. So I'm sure you'll be fielding a lot of questions in a little bit here. So yeah. So welcome everybody to the Run Talk. There's 37 of us now. So we're now actually beating out our numbers for the physical Run Talk, which is amazing. And I will also give a big thank you right now in advance to our friends at Big Rock who helped us kind of get this off the ground right now. Unfortunately, the tap room's closed because they're observing the proper the guidelines set forth by AHS and the Alberta government and doing their part, because obviously the current events are a little bit different than we envisioned things being for today. So yeah, so we have about we're about 37 people here. First of all, I just want to give a quick update on community and all the current events. As we know, COVID-19 has changed a lot of our routines, a lot of our run plans, a lot of our training and racing plans. I'm just going to kind of take this right off the top. One of the questions I've been hearing the most through our YYC Run Crew feed is it still safe to run outside? And we were just talking about this not too long ago, like right before a lot of you popped on. But right now in Calgary, in Alberta, in Canada, it is still safe to go outside and go for walks and go for runs, and the government is encouraging us to remain healthy. That being said, it's really, really important that everybody maintain a proper physical distance from one another, that being about 6 feet or 2 arms lengths, depending on how tall you are. So I just want to kind of say that straight out the gate. That being said, if you do feel like you're not feeling well or are possibly immunocompromised, definitely stay home. But that kind of straight out the gate is, yes, if you can run outside and walk outside, you're still able to. That being said, there's other parts of the world that's not the case. I have family over in Spain, and right now it's full lockdown. So if you're outside riding your bike or walking or running, you're going to get asked to kindly explain why you're doing that. And if you don't have a good reason, and a good reason is not just going for a jog, they're going to be asked to go home. So the longer we make sure we're doing our part to observe the physical distancing guidelines, the less likely it is that it's going to get to the point where we're having to literally just stay home and run on 7-meter long balconies, as that guy in France did. 6 hours, which is amazing. So just wanted to put that out there. And then kind of straight out of the gate, I know a lot of people are itching to hear this question answered. Just an update on the Calgary Marathon and what Run Calgary's up to. So I'm going to pass it right over to you, Kirsten, and you can give us the DL.
Thanks, Raph. I've been trying to get outside and run as well, and I'm lucky because I'm actually not in Calgary right now. I'm at the cabin and I'm able to get out and run. I have to say it's really helping with my low-level anxiety, just as a human, and also obviously professionally. There's a lot of uncertainty, so I think it's such a privilege that we're still able to run, because we A, can, and B, because our liberties haven't been taken away or stifled. So I would say that we can do our part by making sure that continues, by maybe exploring some new areas in town and letting the traditional pathways be for all of the people who might not know where else to go, and use it as an opportunity to get out and explore. Also wanted to make the point that our awesome race director, John Bird, who is also a retired pro triathlete and also a coach, he gave me some advice the other day that I really took to heart, and I want to pass it on because I was giving myself a hard time about not working out last week and not feeling motivated to do much more than go for walks. And he's like, training puts a lot of stress on the body, and maybe you aren't recognizing that there's other stresses in your life right now, and that compounds. And when you have increased uncertainty around your job, or maybe more responsibility at home because there's kids, that offloading something off of your plate or toning down the training is not a bad idea, just to give your body a chance, body, mind, soul, a chance to absorb the load. So don't be too hard on yourselves on the training front. From a Calgary Marathon perspective, we're still working full-time hours. I know a lot of people are maybe slowing down, or there isn't as much to do, but we're not just planning for plan A right now, we're planning for all the letters in the alphabet. And I know Raph said that I was going to give you guys the DL, but the DL is really what we've been saying publicly is the truth. We really just don't know. The current state is that we've been told by SENA and the city that the event ban on public gatherings extends to April 30th, and they're just waiting to see how successful we are in this whole experiment called social distancing, flattening the curve. We're aware that actually lengthens the time that we have to put into this to make sure that more people are safe. So we recognize that May is looking less and less likely. We haven't been told that, but we're obviously preparing that that's a very real possibility at this point. And so what that looks like is doing everything in our power to find another date. And we've been told that we are one of the priority events that will have the privilege to be allowed to try and reschedule. And we're working with our partners, and it's really complex. And for those of you who both, read and commented and shared on my open letter to the Run community, thank you so much for the support. But I do go into quite a lot of depth. It's a deep dive about the complexities of rescheduling a race. And it's just, there's so many things that go into it. So we're just trying to make the best decisions for each event, because we actually have 3 events starting on May 10th with Sport Check Mother's Day. And then obviously the Scotiabank Calgary Marathon. And then the last event of the spring season would be Calgary's fastest 10K in June. So some of the things that we try and like isolate and look at are like how many participants are signed up, what are our partners and stakeholders saying, if we reschedule, can the city and all of the resources be accommodated, wherever our venue is, can they reschedule us, what are the sunk costs that we've already paid for, like are medals on the way, have permits and deposits been made. And then we try and evaluate from there once we have a full picture, like what makes sense for this event and for the participants who are signed up and for our partners. And at the end of the day, we want the events to go on more than anyone. So I think anything that we can do to move the Calgary Marathon, I mean, we're really looking at a bunch of options and have some potential dates that we hope will work out. And right now it's just like a waiting game because the city isn't going to green light something when there is no end date in sight yet. So it's, all of these events and race directors who are rescheduling for the fall, which in and of itself has some challenges just from a resource standpoint. There's only so many runners to go around. There's also only so many timing companies to go around and fencing companies. But in addition to that, that's kind of an arbitrary date. I mean, of course, we can't quite wrap our brains around things not being back to normal by September, but we don't know that that's the case. So there's a lot of leaps of faith that have to happen when you reschedule an event. So those are some of the conversations we're having. And really, I guess that's the best I can do on the Calgary Marathon update.
Cool. Thanks, Kirsten. And I think a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of these races do kind of share resources. So it's not like one city is kind of putting things on hold and they can just figure it out however they want to. It's kind of like all the race directors across North America. You guys are like, you're all kind of a team and you're all kind of working together and facing the same challenges. And is that like correct?
Yeah, so I'm really grateful for the support of the people in my industry. I came from media and it is not anything like the support of the race industry where we, we're all pals and we, trade best practices. We go on vacations together. And on Friday, the race director from the Scotiabank Toronto Waterfront Marathon, she actually organized what was supposed to be a happy hour, just like this, around 5 o'clock, kind of turned into therapy hour. It was race directors from coast to coast, around the Bay, Ottawa, Vancouver, Blue Nose, Manitoba, Toronto, Sporting Life. It was a whole bunch of us, and we all just really talked about, what are our challenges, what are some of the things that we're learning, because everything is just moving so fast and evolving so quickly. What are we hearing from our participants that they want from us? And also, like, if we're all looking at different weekends, making sure that we're not stepping on each other's toes, because not only are we drawing from the same pool of specifically marathoners in the country, but we all work each other's events. So it's like, well, if I'm going to have an event this weekend and you're going to have an event on this weekend, then who's in my control center? Because that's typically race directors from Regina and Toronto and Chicago. And then now they have to choose their, runners are going to have to choose their favorite race, and race directors are going to have to choose like where they want to spend their time and talents when helping out. So yeah, it is really complex, but we're all in it together, and we kind of keep saying that. And I think, it is a bit of a cliche, but it also does give me a lot of solace, like to know that, we're learning together. And I do believe that we're going to come out more resilient, and the industry is going to require resilient leaders to lead it. So we're, making sure that those conversations are happening regularly so that we can come out on the other side better than ever.
Cool. Yeah, it's I think we're all kind of rooting for you guys because we all love your races, and I think that there's a lot of people who were like kind of saw their years sort of derailed with starting with Tokyo and Boston, and it's just a lot of challenges for all of us. So we appreciate all the work that you guys are doing. And I read your piece in iRun magazine, and I hope that everybody else kind of has the opportunity to as well. It was in Medium as well today, which is pretty cool. And I think that does a really good job of really articulating the challenges that you guys are facing, because anybody who thinks that there's not a lot of running and racing. So I know for the race directors, it's all often a huge labor of love, and it's something that it sucks to have to make any decision where we have to kind of change our plans, but we know it sucks. There's a lot of really cool, like one of the things that I've really noticed over the past little while in Calgary is like all of a sudden when we sort of got hit with this there is this great big trend towards like Instagram live classes and all these really cool opportunities for people to continue to train. And even though all of our plans are sort of derailed, it's not time to give up. And I personally find that training provides me with a lot of structure throughout the day. So I'm like training more than ever. One cool thing is I've seen a lot of cool initiatives, and there's the Antisocial Run Club, which my friend Jeff Shikazi has just started, which is basically like a 6-week training plan towards a virtual race that none of us are going to run together, and we're all going to run on different routes, observing the proper social distances. Jeff, I'm just going to pass it over to you for like a quick 1 minute so you can just quickly tell us about what you guys have planned there. And I'm going to unmute you right now. You're live.
Oh, yeah. Hello, everybody. Didn't really prepare for this, but yeah, I mean, I know a lot of you on this call actually, so I probably already spammed you with an invite already to join the little movement, but I know I'm going to make assumptions. A lot of you know what Strava is, the online, social platform for running and tracking runs, and what a virtual race is. But a friend of mine, Katie, posted about a YYC social distance running club in Strava the other day, and it sort of sparked interest in me. Why not take this one step further and make a virtual race out of it? Just to give, I know a lot of you on this call are like me, you need something to train for and sort of keep yourself accountable. It's easy to say we'll go for a few runs a week, but if there's nothing really holding you accountable, it's easy to fall off the track. So a virtual race weekend on May 2nd, May 3rd, that's what we picked for 6 weeks. So it just gives us a little bit of excitement leading towards that. And for a lot of people, once again, I think a lot of people that aren't on this call, that we can really share that knowledge. And I hope that a lot of you can come and sort of help build this community of the people that are sort of coming off the couch running towards like a 5-mile race. We're just going to put out a week at a time, a few different runs, core runs that we think that people can sort of help training, so that we're not just say, see us on May 2nd and then just go for it, trying to guide people along the way to just help engagement levels.
Thanks, Jeff. And the best place for us to find information on that would be?
Yeah, the Instagram that started this morning, Anti-Social Run Club, Facebook event, Strava group, all of the above. So
cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff. And we'll post details on that later on YYC Run Crew. Thanks, Jeff. So yeah, like I said, we do have a surprise guest with us today, Trevor Hofbauer. Trev, it's been like a whirlwind couple days for you, I'm sure. And for those of you who kind of caught up to us before 5 p.m., Trevor's been fielding like media requests and all that fun stuff. Honestly, like, what's the last like 24, 48 hours been like for you?
Yeah, it's been a little crazy. Can you hear me all right? Okay, perfect. It's been a little bit crazy. Last night I was just out watching the sunset with my partner, and I came home and my sister called me and she's like, "Oh my God, did you hear the news? I feel so sorry for you." I'm like, "What are you talking about? Everything's fine." And then she told me that Team Canada was going to be sending athletes to the Tokyo Olympics, and like at first I just like really couldn't think about it because I was still getting inside the house. But now that I've like been able to process my emotions, I think it's actually a good thing. I think a country need to make a stand and say, this is our position. We're not going to tolerate the Olympics taking place during a time of a global pandemic when it could put everybody's health into jeopardy. And I think it was really bold. So I think it was necessary, and I'm like fully supportive of the decision. And it kind of comes at the cost of not running in the Olympics this summer, but I think the Olympics are going to get postponed to next year, and still going to take place, but it's just going to be pushed back.
Yeah, and I don't think, I mean, over the past 100 years, the Olympics have had, like, there was the boycotts and there was some things, but it's only been for like world wars that they've ever, kind of looked at the Olympics and said like, okay, maybe not. So this is pretty unprecedented.
Totally. But if you take a look at the virus itself, we don't really have a contain of the spread. We don't have a lot of data about the virus itself. We don't have a vaccine. There's really no way of treating it either outside of just self-isolating and hoping that your body can fight it off. So if we can kind of curb this over the next little bit, say over the coming weeks, months, and it gets better, but then you have millions of people travel to Tokyo, potentially carriers of the disease, then you have like a second wave of infection, and people come back from the Olympics and start to spread it within their own countries again, and then we go through like a second episode of this, so just make everything so much worse.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we're already seeing, like, I know that I saw a news report today that said basically Hong Kong, they were kind of in the clear, and then they decided to like be a little bit too relaxed, a little bit too soon. And now they're seeing a lot of imported cases. So I think you're dead on. Like, you know, we live in a world where we travel more than ever before. And that means the viruses can travel faster than ever before, which is pretty alarming. So the Olympics, really good decision. So what's sort of the reaction been of like the community and like your coaches and teammates? Has everyone kind of been like, okay, this was the right call? Or, you know, like is everyone sort of like on the same page? Or like, what's that like right now?
Yeah, for the most part, like we have a little group on iMessage here that we talk about every day, and all of us are pretty supportive of it, but there's a few individuals that wish that Team Canada would have taken a little bit more time to possibly tell us first and then tell everybody else, or take some more time to see how things develop. But again, to my point, like if we curb this and the games go on and then everybody gets infected, then it's pretty selfish of us to go over there and even compete. So I think for the most part, it's been pretty positive, but there's always a few people that disagree and have their own opinions, regardless of what everybody else thinks.
Yeah, it was really heartening to see like the few the Summer Olympians that I know that and that I follow on Instagram. A lot of them were all kind of had that same messaging where it's just like, you know what, like this was the right thing to do. And then looking through the comments on Facebook and like CBC and CTV, everyone was kind of like, yeah, right call to make. Really sucks for the athletes, but this was like the right thing to do. Looks like we've got a question from the panel, from the audience. Shirley asks, what does this do to your training? What do you hit the reset button? Like, you know, you peak to train for like a day or a week. So what happens now?
Definitely. That's a good question to ask because I don't even know right now. I was training over the winter for the World Half Marathon Championships, and they were taking place on March 28th. So that race got postponed 2 weeks ago, I believe. So I was peaking, I was ready to race, and then the race got canceled. So I kind of have a little bit of experience there training for a race and then getting canceled. So with this one, it's like postponed well enough in advance that it really doesn't affect the training. And I think if every event is going to be postponed over the next little bit, I'll just go into like a base training phase where I'll hopefully get stronger and not really increase the intensity because that could increase the risk of injury, and just try and play it smart with like doing some easy miles and doing some longer runs to kind of build up that strength, and really trying to take it a little bit easier than I have and just try and enjoy just every moment that you have outside, because I hope we don't get put on lockdown, but if we can enjoy every run we have outside right now, I think that's kind of the perspective all taking place.
Yeah, we certainly don't want to be you've probably seen those Instagram videos of the people who are like pouring like, I don't know if it's like oil or like vegetable oil all over their kitchen floors and just like running in place.
Yeah.
I don't want that.
Oh man, that'd be wild. That's not happening in our house.
No. When I saw that, I was like now you have to clean it up. And Shirley was like, well, they got plenty of time. So I was like, this is true.
They probably have plenty of toilet paper to clean up too.
I wanted to ask Trevor, I mean, he's obviously been able to process this since yesterday, but I talked to him last week and you were already starting to set your mind to this being a possibility. Can you take us through just the last couple of weeks since you were named to the Team Canada for the World Half Marathon Championships in Poland one day and then they canceled it the next? And then I guess just like even around your frame of mind around like what the Olympics means to you and this as part of your journey.
Yeah, totally. And to that point too, like there's so many races out there that you can participate in, and there's so much time that we have, and like your love of the sport right now might change from what that love is going to look like say 6 months, 12 months down the road, right now is a global issue. And I think we all need to be understanding of what's currently happening. And then from there, just kind of look forward towards the next event, whether it be like a social 5K or a competitive 5K or like the Olympics. Every race has value to every individual. And for individuals to play up one event like it's the end all be all of events, I think is kind of the wrong way to look at it, because everybody has their own Olympics in their own mind. And as long as you can focus on what's important to you and what you want to get out of every day, and how that's going to change you and help evolve you in your future opportunities to race, I think you just need to take a look at the big picture of things and really appreciate the current moments that you have.
Cool. Anybody have anything else? Anybody else have questions for Trevor? You can feel free to ask away in the chat. I'll leave it there for a couple moments. All right. Well, in that case, one of the things that we originally planned for this, before all the news and all the stuff happened with Trevor and our Canadian Olympians, was training tips. We did a couple of Ask Us Anythings on the wire through your Instagram feed over the past few days. And we have a few questions. And Melissa, I'm going to tee you up here. First of all, I'll just ask you, like, you can talk a little bit about what your training has been like, and then we can go through some of the questions that I've seen kind of coming through, and then we'll continue to open it up to you and Trevor to talk about training, since you guys are literally experts. So what's your training like now?
Sure. I mean, very similar to what Trevor's saying is that I heard him speak this morning, and I loved, he said, he's running for fun. And I thought, if Trevor can run for fun, we can all take that advice to heart. And just one of the things I always ask my clients is, why do you run? And that was long before this situation presented itself. And honestly, the answer I don't think I have ever heard is for the race result. We run because it gives us better quality of life. We have the most beautiful community here in Calgary with running. So why do we run? It's for our mental health. It's for our physical health. It's for our, emotional well-being. And yes, racing is amazing and it's fun to have those goals, but they will be there again. And so like Trevor, I'm taking a bit of a step back with my high intensity running, and I am having fun with it and doing things that I maybe wouldn't have been able to do in a regular run training build-up. So that's kind of the approach I'm taking right now.
So then what tips would you give to other people? Like, do you think we should kind of and I know we're kind of keep going, but should we just, especially with the virus going, should we reduce our intensity? Should we go on long runs? When there's no structure, no date?
Well, there's a lot of these virtual runs popping up, which are fun motivation to keep training. I know I'm in talks. I mean, Kirsten, you've been involved in this talk on a run initiative with, getting the community together here in Calgary in the hopes of raising money for research for a vaccine for COVID-19. And so you'll see that come out in the next few days. Look for Novid 20 on Strava. But just things like, maybe don't put so much pressure on yourself for crushing your workout. Maybe, remember, run for the love of running is my advice, because running really is an amazing way we're all facing anxiety here. This is affecting every single person in the world. And so we're pretty lucky to have this outlet. And currently we're still able to run outside. So let's respect those two meter rules. So we don't get that taken away anytime soon, but just really kind of step back and reevaluate why you do this. I mean, not all of us are going to the Olympics. And if Trevor can have that viewpoint, I think we all can adopt it as well.
I think we could probably all, take that as a cue that we can kind of chill out
a bit. But I mean, and I don't mean stop training or taking your running seriously if that's what motivates you, but just kind of recognizing that, like Trevor said, there will be another race to train for and to peak for. And I mean, he's experienced the ups and downs of peaking, we all have, but so maybe, and don't put so much pressure on yourself right now. Cool. If a workout goes sideways, it goes sideways.
All right, so I got a question here from Haley for you and Trevor. Any best suggestions or resources for runners who are injured now and don't have access to swim or bike opportunities?
Melissa, I'll let you take that.
Well, I'm sorry, but I missed the last half of the question, Raph.
Yeah, any best suggestions or resources for runners who are injured and don't have access to swim or bike alternatives? So I guess that even for like, you know, multi-sport athletes or maybe, who injured runners who maybe have any issues or not, what are we doing if we can't like swim or bike?
So, I mean, I am a very conservative coach, and my athletes can attest to this. If you're injured, I say rest. And so I know that's not the best, what people always want to hear, but if you're truly injured, this is a perfect opportunity to take the rest that you need. I mean, there's other options such as, you know, yoga and stretching and rolling, those kinds of things. But in terms of injury, I would say use this opportunity to rest and recover.
Totally, I would fully agree with that. And I think if it's a skeletal injury, then definitely sit down a little bit and rest up, because those unfortunately just take time. And if it's a muscular injury, you can kind of work around that a little bit more. But stretching, yoga, Epsom salt baths, they're great. Definitely getting a high quality of sleep and taking fluids, eating the right foods. I think those are all things that you can do, and it does suck that we don't have those resources like swimming pools or stationary bikes, treadmills right now, but you just got to work with what you got.
Yeah. Oil
Yeah,
on
and
the
if you
floor.
can get outside, go for, and if the injury doesn't prevent you from walking or hiking, just get outside and do something like that.
Cool. I got another question. This one came to us via Instagram. And it's good to kind of reground in this every once in a while. The question was from MCE Chaser on Instagram. I just started running again. What are some tips for those of us getting back in the game? So, I mean, this is kind of a back to basics question. Like if someone hasn't really, I think we ask a lot of questions for like the people doing their 10Ks or trying to PB in the half, but what if you're just starting from basics?
Yeah. I'll jump in here. I mean, I do find a lot of people, especially if they have been runners in the past, expect that they're going to jump back and they want to start back where they left off 2 years ago. So, but that's not the case, right? It's one of those sports where you need to build up your muscular endurance again, as well as cardio. So I would say start small, start 1 minute on, 1 minute off. And if that's easy, next time try a bit more, just to, you know, so that you don't risk injuring yourself and that you don't overdo it too quickly. The progression, if you're consistently doing runs, will be quick.
Cool. So we got another one from the audience from Andrew. Andrew, Kirsten, this one's for you. I'll read it out and you can just respond. With the increase in virtual runs and attempts to digitize, how do you see the trend in physically distant running impacting the future of big running events? Helpful, harmful? And that's a good question, I guess, if you look at like things like Strava and whatnot. Like, what is that? Is that something that's on your radar? I know you guys you did a virtual run last year. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I definitely see a place for virtual running in our community. And we dipped our toe with our first ever virtual run in December, the 12Ks of Christmas. And I'm so glad we did, because we learned so many things by experimenting with the virtual run. And it was on a very small scale. So it sold out in, I think, 2.5 hours. It was only 300 people. And we were able to learn a lot about fulfillment, what people wanted, what made it successful, what were the challenges, what surprised us. And I think the thing that I loved the most out of it was how the community moved into the digital world and the digital space, and how we were able to engage with our community at a time of year, December, when we don't have a lot of traditional programming. So I think that virtual racing obviously has a place in our community, whether you're a race or a club or Strava, and it really just depends on what your objectives are. So literally 1 month ago, it feels like a lifetime, but a month ago at Running USA, which is the industry conference for race directors, I sat in a campfire, which was probably about 80 race directors, and the topic was virtual runs. And it was the second time we've had that as a topic, and a campfire is where we all participate. It's a brainstorming session. And what I learned is that race directors are using it for different outcomes. So there were race directors who were using virtual racing to augment their already traditional race weekend. there were race directors who were using virtual running to get rid of leftover medals after the race. And then there's race directors like my team where we're using it to engage with our community and have kind of some fun with it. So we're doing it at a time of year when we're not busy. We don't have partners or major sponsors, so we can kind of be a little bit cheeky and be maybe a little off brand for what wouldn't work for Calgary Marathon, for example. So it just really depends on what your objective is. But now what we're seeing is the pivot from every traditional race to virtual. So any race director out there is looking at virtual as a way of basically a solution to not being able to put on their traditional IRL race this year. Some of us are fortunate enough that we may be able to postpone or reschedule, but a lot of races are not going to be able to do that. So my understanding from a source I shall not name is there's 2,000 races going virtual in the next month. I think like that's a lot of races basically converting their traditional event. So they'll be hyper localized. It's not like we may even know about them. It's going to be for people who are already registered and are encouraged to go out and do like a social distancing run on their own so that they can get their medal or shirt. But when I kind of peruse some of the comments on the races that I've seen pivot, because as you know, last weekend, 2 weekends ago already was St. Patrick's Day. So in the US, there are like hundreds and hundreds of Shamrock Shuffles. And a lot of those races pivoted overnight, and I kudos to them because I thought they did a great job. But what they did not anticipate or did not, think through is that a lot of those runners were going to show up and do the route anyways, just like what we saw in New York when they canceled the event and because of the hurricane, and then people showed up in Central Park and they basically went out and ran in huge groups. Well, that doesn't work now. And also there's challenges for race directors around, converting automatically our participants into a virtual because you haven't signed a waiver. And, especially in some countries, maybe not as much in Canada, but potentially somebody gets hit by a car and it's like, well, what were you doing? Well, I was out running the Calgary Marathon virtual race that I didn't sign a waiver for. We could find ourselves in some legal trouble. So to be honest, like it is a quickly evolving conversation. And I'm actually hosting a Zoom like this tomorrow for a bunch of race directors to talk about this, amongst other things. And I'm also, they've never even heard of virtual runs apparently in Sweden. So I got asked by the Federation of Sweden Athletics to host a virtual race camp about virtual runs for race directors in Sweden. So let me tell you that this is on the mind of every race director. And I think the other complication is trying to understand the threshold from our runners. Like, is this something people want? How can we make sure that it is a positive experience and that we also, are making sure they're not coming to one spot at the same time to pick up packages? How are we fulfilling? Because the 300 packages that we did, just to bring it for full circle back to our 12Ks of Christmas virtual run, it took 75 staff hours for us to package, label, and deal with all the fulfillment around mailing out the packages. And 60% of people picked up from our office. So we don't have the luxury of inviting people to our office right now. So how are we going to convert our 10,000-ish runners, if that's what we end up, doing, turning them into a virtual race? And just for the record, that is not what we're currently talking about doing. But, obviously, like I said, we're looking at B through Z. And if that's the case, like, how are we fulfilling that when we can't have people coming into one space together? So I think there's going to be room for it. I also think at the end of this, just to come back to your main question, is people are going to be desperate to get out and run together. That's the beauty of racing, and that's the beauty of run crews like YYC Run Crew, is that we get to do it together and it's a collective. And I think that there's totally space for virtual, and it will probably be cemented because of this global public health crisis. It will always be now in the repertoire of what we do as runners. But ultimately, there's something that you can't replace in the digital space by coming together and celebrating and taking a victory lap and having a beer at the finish line. A big rock beer.
A big rock beer. Another word from our sponsors. Yeah, thanks for that, Kirsten. I think you're dead on. There's something to be said for running as a community and running in a group. And I think that it's great to have virtual runs and stuff like that, especially when we can't have like physical runs, but community is always going to be there. I got another question here, and I actually had two questions really similar to this recently. One was from Jake. Oh, actually, they're both from you, Jill. Okay. What would you guys recommend? This one's more for Melissa and for Trevor. But what would you recommend for people who are intimidated by set desired paces for training runs? And I'll elaborate on this because I even kind of feel it myself sometimes, but I'll look at like a set pace for a tempo run or for intervals, and it says like, 3:45 per kilometer or whatever, or 4 minutes kilometer for 20 minutes, and I kind of like get this almost like this race anxiety before I go into my training run where I'm like, well, shoot, like I've never like that pace is kind of a stretch. I mean, do you guys experience that? Is that a thing where you're kind of like intimidated by a workout, and how do you deal with it?
Well, I'll answer this, but I think I'm going to use Trevor as an example because he ran in the trials without a watch and didn't even know what pace he was running, and it seemed to go pretty well for him. And I think with sometimes we do get our heads so wrapped around paces that we actually underperform. And, a few of my clients I have strictly for this very reason, they get anxious when I give them paces that they run all their tempos on effort. And you know what? They always perform way better than if I prescribe them paces. And so that's one suggestion I would give to somebody who gets anxiety about, crushing a workout is that, or they go in with the idea that they're going to run it on effort, and then, they can look at the data after if they want.
Yeah, I think those are very strong points to make. To add to that additionally, I know some individuals do get anxious over paces, but some individuals do like having those kind of target goals. But if you are one that does get anxious, and I used to get anxious about those paces, so I took it off my watch. I didn't have to think about it anymore, and I went more off of feel. A coach that I had at the time, he was able to kind of opened my eyes a little bit more regarding that, and he told me just straight up, hey Trev, there's so many variables to consider, like, is the route that you're running on flat or hilly? Is it windy out? Is it warm? Is it cold? How does your body just generally feel on that day? Is it fatigued? Is it feeling really strong? So if you consider all the variables and take a look at the big picture of what the day is presenting to you, it can allow you to perform a little bit better in that workout. And say if your set pace is 4 minute kilometers, 4:01 isn't bad. If you're 1 second off, you're not going to lose fitness from that. But if you're 1 second faster, then that's great. But if you're one that's always setting these paces for yourself or having these expectations with paces, even if you're a couple seconds off, as long as you put the effort there and as long as you're doing your best, that's where you're going to get the best results for your ultimate goal down the road.
Yeah, I like that. I had one advice from a girl who I'm good friends with here locally, and her coach had given her advice is to not get too worked up about the highs and the lows of training. So, and I love that advice, because don't get like, celebrate a workout that goes well, sure, but don't put too much emphasis on any one workout as well.
Good to know. I think that was actually, I kind of have been playing with that this season as well, just like switching to going by perceived exertion as opposed to going by like, a pace zone. And I've found it to be really beneficial as well, because like your body doesn't really know or care how many minutes a kilometer you're doing. It knows what effort it's doing. Yeah. And I found that that's really helped me as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, come race time, people always forget, they're like, how am I going to hold this for a marathon? You forget you're not tapered. You're not in the race mentality and mindset as you are, when you're out by yourself training. And so I think that too needs to be considered too. And definitely a taper goes a long way.
Yeah. I think one of my best half marathons ever came during a week where we were doing this like stair challenge for Run Crew. It was like 3 years ago, and it was how many times you can get up the Glencoe Club stairs in 20 minutes. And I had a half marathon on the Sunday, and I tried to do like 10 times up in 20 minutes on the Tuesday, and just like cooked my legs. Didn't do anything between then and the race. and just like threw down like my first sub 130 half marathon. And I think, Melissa, I think you were like, you congratulated me on Instagram, like, welcome to the sub 130 club. So it's funny.
Oh, that's funny.
I forgot to add in one more variable. So a lot of individuals that are in this chat right now probably live in Calgary, and Calgary, you're at 3,000 feet. So
Yep.
a lot of times when you are going to go race, it might be down in Toronto, it might be in Vancouver, it might be somewhere where you naturally get more oxygen. And that is going to give you a little bit of performance boost on race day. So if your goal is to run a 130 half marathon and you know the pace that you have to hit, be content not hitting that pace in Calgary because you have the altitude to deal with. So you are going to be running a couple seconds slower per kilometer as a result. So it's always okay to run a little bit slower in Calgary because you're going to be running just fine on race day when you're down at sea level.
That will always be my excuse from now on. I'm like, well, I'm in Calgary.
It's a good excuse.
Got to pick your races strategically, Raph.
Yeah, really. Cool. So there is actually, I'm gonna let everybody on here know right now, there is also a function. If you go down to participants and hover on the bottom of the window, you can actually raise your hand if you do want a question and you're desperate to be on video. You're welcome to raise your hand, and I can unmute you and you can ask the question yourself, or you guys can continue to ask the questions on the chat. And right now I'm actually gonna pass the mic over to Haley to ask a question. Hills?
Amazing. Hi, everybody. So I know like there's been a lot of people training for spring races and then have started to worry that they've done this like huge buildup, and now that they have like nothing to like use it for, I guess, so to speak. So again, like there's been a handful of people who have reached out to me even with things like Boston, and like, do you still keep, like, obviously you can't keep going with that intensity, but you also don't want to lose all the progress you've made. Is there like any tips, like workarounds with that?
Trevor, do you want to jump in or do you want me to go here? I'm easy.
Yeah, if you're ready to roll, I'm still thinking here.
Well, I would say, like, one thing I've asked, and I'm going to take more of a different approach. One thing I do ask some of my clients when they feel like they've wasted this build, my question back to them is, have you really wasted it? You've bettered your fitness, you've bettered yourself. Is all lost? And I think in every build, you build, peak, and then you're kind of starting off in a better place for your next build. So I think if you carry on, kind of like what Trevor said at the beginning, he's pulling back his intensity. I would recommend doing that. If you've peaked for a marathon right now, your volume is likely high, so you're probably more conditioned to run a little more miles. So I would continue running some miles, but just reducing the intensity. That would be my advice.
Totally. I think that was probably the best answer anybody could have provided, to be honest. And yeah, I kind of just went through the same experience building up for a race and it never taking place. So in my mind, I actually just ticked it off and I said, okay, I trained for that race. I peaked out, even though I didn't participate in it. I'm done with that training block. So I put it behind me. And now I'm preparing to get into another training block, just for the fun of it. So even though, like, say, Boston didn't happen, I think there's a lot of positives that you can take from your experiences through your training block and use it towards your next training block. And hopefully you can utilize, not only would it be an equivalent fitness to where you're at right now, but probably an even better version of yourself in the fall.
That's a really good way to look at it. I mean, I feel like coming out of winter and coming into this, it's gonna be a lot of consecutive great training blocks, but it's a good way to frame it. And I think that you can see that fitness build over time. And it's hard when you kind of like sit back and just like look at what you've accomplished, even if you're not racing. Sometimes it's important to kind of like sit back and be like, oh, you know what? Like, I am gaining this fitness. And like, when the time comes, because it will come, like, I'm gonna have all this in my back pocket, which is a good thing to remind yourselves of. Thanks
for asking that question though, Haley. I think that's a question on everybody's mind right now.
All right, now I got another question. This one back from Jeff. So Jeff, I'm gonna throw you back onto the spot here and pass you the mic. Go ahead.
It's a question for Kirsten. just in terms of races, hopefully coming back sooner than later, have you guys talked about protocols that might look different from your typical race? Like, obviously we have corrals for bigger races, but could you see like a corral like being as small as 50 people lasting an entire day? Like, yeah, I don't know. 8 o'clock.
Yeah,
start.
good question. This isn't something that we're talking about now because we've suspended registration and there's uncertainty about when events will take place. This is something we started talking about February 18th, because if you remember, one short month ago, Tokyo Marathon limited its field. They announced that on the 17th of February, and race directors have been talking and thinking about this since then. And pretty quickly after that, races started suspending, canceling, postponing. And it became really apparent that we were going to have to make some changes to our races. So even before we were like looking at alternative dates, we were talking about things like, you know, we have gloves in all of our aid station boxes, but and protocols on how people hold things like cups. But we were talking about, you know, how are we going to make sure that people are wearing them? Are we going to have hand sanitizer on course? Are we going to maybe not have apples and only do things that are packaged and peeled? Are we going to get rid of a massage? Like, all of these things started coming up around how do we mitigate the exposure risk to our participants, volunteers, spectators, our partners, well before now. Like, now we're having different conversations, but we've already sort of made those plans. So when we do go back to having events, which will happen eventually, we know that there's going to be a period of adjustment, and there's going to be some things that are temporary, and there's going to be some things that are long-term. So what, you know, my team and I are doing right now is really trying to split up our day. Like, what are right now problems? What are medium length problems? Like, what are things that we're going to have to be talking about in 6 months to a year? And what are, you know, long-term plans that we need to be thinking about now, and how we do business to stay in business? So yeah, I mean, we're absolutely going to be making changes. I think we're all learning from each other. Also, like I said, like, race directors all talk. A good example of an event that actually did happen was the LA Marathon. And a day later, and it would have been canceled. So they literally squeaked through. And I think they did a pretty good job around some of their communications, and also just making a few adjustments in a very, very small amount of time, that they were able to go ahead and, you know, have the event. And then California, you know, less than 10 days later is practically closed down. I think we learned some things that they did right, and some places where they could have probably done better. And now we have the luxury of time to all kind of put our brains together and figure out what it looks like going forward.
Cool, thanks, Kirsten. Now we got another question from Murray. Asked us a little bit earlier, so I'm gonna keep the mic on you for a quick one more. For someone living in Alberta, would a virtual race, Northern Alberta, would a virtual race likely mean completing a 42.2 distance anywhere? You know, hopefully the marathon's still on. I think it is, just it's may not be the same date. Like, we don't know yet, but how would you respond to that?
Yeah, so first time marathon participant, Murray. So congratulations for even getting this far, because I know you're probably well into your training block. And it's probably pretty difficult to stay motivated, especially as a first time marathoner, to know that that goal race is a moving target at this point. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, and good luck with the rest of your training. We hope that we'll see you at the start line, whenever that might be. But I would say right now, like, we're really talking about plan B being a reschedule. So we hope that you'll join us on the new date. And what I've said to people coming from out of town is that you need to make the decision that's best for you and your family. And if that means traveling internationally, maybe you need to make, you know, some decisions now that might include like canceling flights. And luckily airlines are being really, really flexible. And also just know that if you booked at our host hotel, you can still cancel with no penalty up until like 72 hours before. So it sounds like if you're coming from Northern Alberta, you'd probably be driving, and you might not have urgency on a decision around accommodations or flights, but just on what you should do with your training. And I would say keep training. And all the advice that Trevor and Melissa gave was fantastic around maybe just like listening to your body, not pushing yourself as hard, and still trying to follow some sort of routine and plan. And then ultimately, if, you know, we ended up having to go to plan M and it was just a virtual race, you know, that I kind of always make the assumption that everyone kind of knows what we're talking about when we say virtual running, but I'm learning that not everyone does. And really the virtual run is just what you said. It's running the race in its entirety in one portion, but anywhere that it's accessible to you, and still being able to celebrate your accomplishment with the people closest to you. And, you know, we would still send you your medal and t-shirt if it ended up going in that direction, so that you still can count the accomplishment, because it certainly is one. It's probably more of one if you're running it by yourself in Northern Alberta than it would be on the course where you're carried by the crowd and have the support of aid stations. So I wish you the best in all your training, Marie.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing we saw last year, which was really cool for Seaweeds participants at the Lululemon Seaweeds Half Marathon. They had the virtual 21.1K. There was a cap on it, and they got the same medals that everybody else got, which I thought was really cool, because for some of the races that are really hard to get into, you're able to participate still. And, you know, looking into kind of our new reality here, this may only resonate with those unfortunate souls who happen to be triathletes as well, but Ironman is launching a VR platform, which none of us know what it means, but they have this Ironman VR, which is going to, I feel like it's going to be a combination of Zwift and Strava and Garmin Connect and all those things. And they're actually going to have qualification spots for the Ironman 70.3 World Championships in New Zealand, based on results from the Ironman VR, which kind of like I don't get, because I don't see how it works for swimming, and like biking and running I can kind of wrap my head around, but like is it okay if my transition time is like a day because I don't get into the pool to like, you know, a day later? So it's really interesting to see the new kind of this reality that we're living in. It's kind of like this weird episode of Black Mirror combined with like fitness, which would probably be the most boring episode of Black Mirror ever, because it'd be like,
we'd all watch it.
We'd watch it.
You'd have an audience of at least 45.
Yeah. It wouldn't make Netflix. It'd be on Amazon Prime, like buried deep within the depths that we would just see.
I mean, to your point, Raph, I think like what we know is that out of times like this, innovation is created and industries change and things are disrupted. And that's a great point, like around what Ironman's doing. And I think, you know, running is always going to be around, and it probably needed a little bit of a shakeup. And I would be very surprised if we got on the other side of this thing and there wasn't a boom, because of all the people that are just like reconnecting with the simplicity of being able to go out and for a run. What I hope is that all of the race organizers are still there to be able to be a part of that story when there's an opportunity to have races again. But I think we'll see a lot more runners, and now we have a little bit of time to also figure out how are we going to service those runners when the page turns on this chapter.
Yeah, and hopefully it'll be turning sooner rather than later, but who knows. So I got another question here that I'm going to address. I'll read it out. What advice do you have for newer runners or slower runners who want to run, but they feel they don't have a place in the run community because they aren't concerned with being fast or finishing long distances? How can we support all types of runners? I'm going to ask this question because it's something I'm pretty passionate about as well. I think that community is the backbone of run. And I believe that, you know, every runner should feel like they have their own place. I think that things like Ale Trails are super cool because, you know, they do bring all of our collective run communities together. And I know that there's run crews out there that are quicker paced. Trev, I think you're on. I'm just gonna move Trevor here somewhere, man. There you go. You know, the biggest thing, like when we started YRC Run Crew, formerly like the Tuesday night run club 9 years ago, it was kind of this scrappy hodgepodge group of runners. But one of the things that we noticed that really changed was when we kind of gave it its own brand and its own identity. And I think that there's runners out there, you know, whether your tempo pace is like a 3:30 minute kilometer or a 7-minute kilometer, I think that running is something that belongs to everyone, because all you need is 2 feet and a heartbeat. You don't need to have like a spin studio or props or anything like that. You just need a pair of shoes. So anybody who's looking to like start their own or who wants to create that community, I just say like, honestly, I say like, start with an Instagram profile, start with like a Facebook page and a Strava group. Like a logo helps, but it's not necessary. A name is a game changer, and create a community. Because if you look at other cities like Vancouver, or Toronto, there's a lot of run clubs. And I think that one thing that Calgary is ready for, as much as like YRC Run Crew is like kind of our baby, I think it'd be amazing if 2 years from now there was like 15, 20, 30 run crews, all with these like really, really strong, passionate identities, because that just means more people running. And more people running means the world is a better place. Lots of endorphins to go around in that case.
Aren't sure about how to join. They're intimidated to join one of the existing communities.
Oh, say I got a question, a physical question here for some. If someone's, what was that?
What about people who feel intimidated to join one of the existing communities?
Yeah, someone feels intimidated about joining one of the existing communities, I would say definitely reach out to that run community and say, like, I think that there's a gap in your offering, and I'd like to help that. I think as we get into summer and as we get out of this, one thing that's really cool to see, I think Kirsten, you posted about it the other day, was this kind of like back to basics fitness lifestyle. I think and I hope there's gonna be a lot more people running. So I would hope that, you know, when we're running as a crew together as YRC Run Crew again, I would hope that we have the resources and the people to support like the entire range of paces. Because I know that you know, especially in the wintertime, it gets whittled down to like a hardy few people who are crazy enough to go for runs in -30, which happens to be like a very specific group. So, okay, we got a couple more questions here. Okay, so from Andrew, maybe a wrap-up question. For each of you hosts, guests, you two, Raf, what are some of your favorite online resources currently for running communities /running/community/time wasting, and where can we find each of you online? I'll go last. I'll let Kirsten go first because she's like next to me in the window.
Well, I am spending most of my time working, and I would say it's definitely not a waste. But I would say that my current running resources are typically race director related, and I'm just following like running and events and marathon as Google alerts, so I kind of get a cross range through that and flipboard of just what's happening in the industry and what's happening with races. And that's where Raf was saying, I posted an interesting article that was in the New York Times, just a snapshot of really people running all over. And it gave me a lot of hope that, like I said, we're gonna have a bit of a renaissance for running on the other side of this. You can find me both on Instagram and on Facebook, which I feel like is also having a renaissance during this public health crisis. I spent more time on Facebook in the last week than I had in the last 5 years. But essentially, I'm at Kirsten Fleming, and also just Run Calgary and Calgary Marathon is where we're posting all of our event updates. Thanks for the question, Andrew.
Melissa?
Well, as you know, as you spoke to building your own little community, I've built my We Run the World coaching community, and we have our WhatsApp group, and we're always chatting on there and encouraging each other and motivating each other. And to that other question that was just asked about being intimidated to join run groups, you know, one thing that I do want to say is I've been involved in a lot of various communities, and the run community is so welcoming. It does not matter what pace you run. There is always somebody else running your pace. And I always say there's always somebody slower and there's always somebody faster. Even Trevor can say that there's probably somebody faster than him. Do you know what I mean? There's always somebody slower and there's always somebody. So don't be too intimidated by it. I think just try it and just reach out to some of these groups. I mean, mine's We Run the World Coaching on IG, and I'm CML Run YYC. There's a ton of clubs, inviting clubs in this city.
Trevor, your turn.
Yeah, for my running resources, I don't take a look at too much, to be honest. I do coach a few athletes, so I dig in pretty deep to the Daniel's Running Formula book, but there's a lot of numbers, and it's probably going to be pretty dry for a lot of people. But that's what I go to. And then also through Twitter, I follow along with CBC Olympics, and Athletics Canada and TSN, ESPN, stuff like that. You can find me on Twitter at Trevor Hofbauer, and then Instagram is at Trev Hofbauer.
Sweet. Thanks, Trevor. Okay, I guess it's my turn. Online resources. I mean, right now I'm a little bit like a media fiend, just like getting everything from everywhere. But for sports, CBC Sports, and then obviously like Sportsnet when there's something relevant, which there's not right now. And I would say online, being a triathlete, I get a lot of stuff from Slow Twitch, which is like this big online triathlon forum. It's like it's a very interesting online community, but there's a lot of really good content on running from there. And obviously, I think there's a lot of really great books out there right now, which I think we all have time to read. Books like Endure is one, and
Grit's another really good one.
oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's some good books out there. I'll definitely post some more run recommendation books shortly. And then also my own personal plug. Everyone can find me at Raf Lopez, RAFLOPEZ on Instagram is probably where I am most active. And then you can read my blog at shutuplegs.org. Putting lots of stuff out, kind of like biking and running, because nobody really wants to hear what I have to say about swimming. Now I'm going to close out with one last question, and I'm going to put her on the live video because a whole bunch of us haven't seen her in some time since she moved to Toronto. So Vicky, what's your question?
Hey everybody. So hi. Out in the six. So my one question I wanted to ask everybody was if you like, how did you know it was the right time to leave your day job to follow your passion? So like running or whatever you're doing, maybe you didn't leave your day job, but yeah.
That's a really good question. So I was like, okay, we need to slide this one in. So thanks, Vicky. Who wants to go first?
I'll jump in.
You go, yeah.
Oh. Okay. So a little bit of background. I worked for New Balance for about 3 years as a technical representative, and I saved up money over that time to ensure that I had enough savings to kind of make the big jump off the deep end to make running my full-time job. And I did that a little prematurely. Now when I take a look back at my finances, but I think it's starting to work out right now. So basically, I made sure I had enough saved. I quit my job at a time when I made my first Canadian national team and when my trajectory was still going up and the Olympics was getting a little bit closer. And that was about 2-3 years ago now. So it was a little bit of timing with my athletic capabilities and where I was at, and making sure that I had enough saved up.
Cool, sweet. And I think it's worked out pretty well for you, I think, so.
Totally. But also there's not a lot of funding in the sport, so I would recommend if you ever do leave your day job to pursue running, definitely make sure you have something going on part-time, not only to keep you stimulated, but to make sure that you can cover some bills, because even right now I have no funding and that's just the way it is. So it's tough.
Yeah. Melissa.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I changed what I was doing. I'm a CPA, I'm an accountant. And I would come home every day and my husband would say to me, "How was your day?" And I'd be like, "Oh yeah, it's fine. I want to talk about work." Every day, every single day. And I would come home from a coaching session and he'd be like, how was it? And I just couldn't stop talking. And finally one day he says to me, he's like, "You do realize what you need to do here, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And I've never looked back, and yeah, it was a very good decision. But I mean, a little bit of history, I always wanted to be a psychologist, and my dad convinced me, no, you take on everyone's problems, don't become a psychologist. And I also want to be a teacher. And I feel like coaching is actually kind of those two things combined. And so it's the best of all worlds for me.
That's a good one. I'll go next because I feel like I'm similar to you, Melissa. I was working in oil and gas for like 10 years. And honestly, I kind of got to a point where I was like getting home and I just really wasn't stoked on what I was doing. And for me, like, you know, run isn't the singular thing that I do, but it's a big part of what I do. And it's very much a part of how I would define myself. So I would say like, I kind of got to this point where I was like, you know what, if I stay on this path working in the career that I'm working, which is awesome, and it's a great place to be. There's amazing people in the sector, but it just wasn't for me. I kind of got to this point where it's like, you know what, I'm not stoked on this anymore, and if I stay down this path, it's 20 more years of this, and if I leave that path, I don't really know what there is, but there is always channels to go back to turn around. And yeah, I just decided it was kind of like it was time for me, and now I'm kind of in this position where I'm really stoked on what I do. Kind of like what Trevor said, it's not as easy and chill as you want it to be sometimes. But you know, I don't have any regrets, because now I can say that I followed what I wanted to do, and you know, there's storms you got to weather, but it's totally worth it. Kirsten, your turn.
Well, I can't wait to hear what Vicky's scheming up over in this next, because I bet you it's going to be something awesome. So let's connect offline, Vicky. Yeah, I mean, if you've ran with me and asked me how I got into race directing, I probably told the story a lot of times, but the very brief short of it is that I worked in morning television for 10 years. I was at City TV, A channel before that. And I left in 2010, and not on the greatest of terms. I made it through 6 rounds of layoffs, and towards the end, it wasn't great times there. And essentially on a Friday, I was told that on Monday I was no longer on air and I was going to be a producer, and that I would basically just shut up and take my new role. And if I didn't like it, there was someone younger and prettier who would do my job for less money. Direct quote. I had already really been thinking about getting out of that business, and I decided that I was not going to be treated that way. And I went in on Monday and demanded a package, and I'd never looked back. I moved to Dubai because I had family there, and I was in a non-compete, so I actually couldn't work in media for 1 year in Alberta. And so I went overseas, and my aunt and uncle are incredible runners. They've been running since they were probably in their early 20s. They're now in their late 50s. They've done everything from comrades to 10 wine marathons. Between them, I think they probably have 250 marathons under their belt. And my aunt and I were actually running the Great Scottish Marathon in Scotland. And she said, why don't you move to Dubai? What are you going back to Calgary for? And by the end, I was convinced, came back, pretty much gave up everything and went out there, where I got very involved in run. I was volunteering and helping plan races. And when I came back to Canada for my now husband, a year and a half later, I was like, do people get paid to do this? I think there might be a job here. And I really chased after this job at the Calgary Marathon. I got a contract working for some media, doing their kind of media stuff and some activation stuff on the side, just to help out, to kind of get my foot in the door. And true story, the then marketing director called me of the Calgary Marathon, Lynn Cox, and she said, can I take you for dinner? I'm thinking about moving to Dubai. And I was like, I'm taking your job. And the rest is history. And it's been, 8 years. And I wouldn't change it for the world, not even during this challenging time.
Super
Make
cool.
the leap, Vicky, make the leap.
Yeah, Vicky, I can't wait. We're going to have a little side conversation with you here. Okay, well, 6:13, that's kind of where we plan to leave it. So I just want to say thank you very much to Melissa and Trevor and Kirsten. I think that this was fantastic. I want to thank everybody who joined in with us today for our Big Rock RUNTalks. I forgot to say this at the beginning, but we encourage everybody to have a nice cold one at the beginning of the RUNTalk, so we can kind of have this cool have a beer atmosphere. If you're looking for Big Rock beer, they are doing deliveries. And the people there are awesome. So yeah, if you have any suggestions or ideas or things you guys would like to hear about, we are planning to do this every Monday from now until who knows. So stay tuned. Keep an eye on the YWC Run Crew Instagram. Definitely follow the wonderful people who were featured here today on Instagram as well. Haley was kind enough to post our Instagram handles in the chats there. And I just want to say thank you very much to everybody.
Thanks, Raph. This is great.
Virtual hugs, everyone.
Thanks for having me. Stay healthy and stay safe.
Bye.
Be distant from each other too. Keep that distance.
You're so sweet.
See you guys. Thanks, everybody.
See ya.